Before you close your eyes tonight, let's drift back to the year 1901, a time when a single light guided sailors through the dark Pacific. Stay with me, and don't forget to follow for more calming bedtime histories like this one. The story begins on the small island of San Miguel, resting quietly on the edge of the Visayan Sea. The waves were soft that night, brushing against the rocky cliffs below the old stone lighthouse. Inside, keeper Elias Navarro, a man in his 50s with sun-creased skin and salt-tangled hair, prepared the lamp for another long watch. The lighthouse had stood there for over a decade, built by craftsmen who'd left their initials carved into its base. Elias knew each crack in the wall, each whisper of wind that slid through the narrow tower windows. Every evening at twilight, he polished the glass, trimmed the wick, and whispered a short prayer before striking the match. As the light bloomed and stretched over the sea, Elias would step onto the balcony and listen. The ocean always had a story: the groan of ships in the distance, the call of gulls, and sometimes faint echoes of songs from fishermen on the far shore. He felt those sounds more than he heard them. The night was calm, but the air carried something different, a shift, a faint electricity that reminded him of storms long past. He leaned against the railing, breathing deeply the scent of salt and metal. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a ship's bell rang once, twice, then fell silent. Elias had been the lighthouse keeper for almost 20 years. He had outlived 2 storms that flattened nearby villages, and one great wave that nearly swallowed the tower itself. But his greatest fear wasn't the sea, it was being forgotten. He reached for the old brass telescope beside the door, a relic from the Spanish Navy, and aimed it toward the horizon. There was nothing there but a line of silver moonlight. Still he watched. Watching was his duty, and his comfort. Below, a lamp flickered in the small cottage where he lived. A book lay open on the table, its pages marked by sand and candle wax. It was his logbook, where he wrote not only ship names and weather, but thoughts, memories of a life spent alone among tides. He wrote that night, "The sea is kind when the wind is low, but she forgets no one." As the ink dried, Elias smiled faintly. The rhythm of the waves lulled him into calm. He didn't know that his story, the keeper, the light, the endless sea, would someday fade into the quiet pages of forgotten history. But for now, his light burned steady, and the island slept beneath its glow. The flame hummed softly, the glass lenses turning with the sound of gears and oil. Each rotation spread the light farther into the dark. Each heartbeat matched the gentle pulse of the ocean below. And as the night deepened, Elias whispered to himself, "May the sea remember me kindly." The wind carried his words out toward the horizon, mingling with the rhythm of the tide. Before you close your eyes, take a slow breath. Tonight we travel further into the keeper's quiet world. If you enjoy peaceful history stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and let the tide carry you back here again. The next morning arrived with the gentlest whisper of rain. Droplets slid down the lighthouse window, tracing crooked paths across the fogged glass. Elias Navarro woke early, as he always did, to the rhythm of the sea tapping against the stones below. He stretched his arms, joints creaking like old wood, and listened to the silence between the waves. It was a silence he had grown to love, a silence that remembered everything. He brewed his coffee over a small flame, using the same dented kettle he'd carried for 20 years. The smell filled the narrow kitchen, mingling with salt and damp rope. Outside, the fog wrapped the island in soft gray cloth, and the world beyond the lantern tower seemed to vanish. On a small shelf above his table sat a wooden box, its surface scratched by time. Inside were letters he had never mailed. They were written to Isabella, a woman whose laughter he still heard when the sea was calm. Once, long ago, she had promised to join him on the island. But life on the mainland had pulled her away, leaving only her handwriting on paper now yellowed at the edges. Elias opened one of those letters and read it quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "The nights here are endless, but the stars keep me company. I've named one after you, though I can never be sure which one it truly is." He smiled, folded the page, and placed it back. He never felt lonely in the way others feared. His solitude was steady, gentle, and honest. The sea, after all, spoke to him every night. Later that day, he climbed the spiral stairs to clean the lamp's lenses. His hands moved with the certainty of habit. Each motion was a memory, trimming the wick, adjusting the gears, tightening the brass fittings. The lighthouse was alive in its own quiet way, breathing with the tide. As he worked, his thoughts drifted to the day the lighthouse was first lit. He had been a young man then, standing proudly beside his father, who was the first keeper. The ceremony was small. A few officials, a priest, and fishermen who had brought baskets of fruit and dried fish. When the flame ignited for the first time, everyone cheered, and Elias's father had whispered, "This light isn't only for ships, my son. It's for every soul searching for direction." Now, decades later, those words stayed with him. Every turn of the lantern reminded him of that promise. He kept a weather journal, its pages filled with sketches of clouds and notes about winds. Sometimes he drew birds that perched on the tower railings, herons, gulls, once even a wandering falcon. He liked the discipline of observation. It gave shape to time. The longer he stayed on the island, the more he realized that time was like the sea. It never truly stopped, only changed form. When the afternoon sun broke through the fog, Elias walked down the stone path to the shore. The sand glistened with shells and driftwood. He picked up a small piece of coral and examined it under the light. Its structure was intricate, like a tiny city built by unseen hands. He thought about how everything, even coral, leaves behind a story. Maybe one day, someone would find this island and wonder about the man who once tended the light. He returned to his cottage before dusk and lit the lamp again. The ritual never grew old. It was an act of faith that light always finds its way through darkness. As the beam turned, Elias watched it reach across the water and fade into the horizon haze. He took out his logbook and wrote slowly, "Some nights, I think of her laughter mixing with the wind. I think of all the voices the sea has carried, fishermen, sailors, children on the shore. Maybe the sea keeps them all. Maybe she will keep mine too." The flame flickered softly as if answering him. Outside, a thin mist began to fall again, whispering against the stones. The keeper leaned back in his chair, letting his eyes rest. The steady sound of the ocean was the only heartbeat he needed. And somewhere, in that endless rhythm of tide and wind, the island of San Miguel kept its promise. It remembered. Before you drift into sleep, keep your heart open to memory. Every lighthouse has its secrets, every wave its whisper. And if you love quiet stories of forgotten places, follow now. Let's keep this light alive together. The third night after the fog lifted, the wind turned warm. Elias Navarro sat by his small desk, the lamp flamed steady, paper spread before him. He dipped his pen into ink and began another letter, one he knew would never leave the island. He wrote slowly, carefully, as though the sea itself might be reading. "Isabella, the ocean has been kind today. The sky carried clouds that looked like sails, and for a moment, I thought I saw you in one of them. Perhaps it was only the light." Outside, the surf broke softly against the rocks. The air smelled of salt and rusted iron, and the steady creak of the lantern gears filled the silence like a heartbeat. He paused, listening. The rhythm comforted him. It was proof that the tower still breathed. The letters were not love notes in the ordinary sense. They were half memories, half meditations, fragments of a life that had once been full of sound and laughter. He told her about the weather, about birds nesting in the eaves, about the tiny herbs he tried to grow in a cracked clay pot. Sometimes he described dreams, walking through a marketplace he'd never visited, or hearing music echoing from the mainland across an invisible bridge of mist. Each letter ended the same way. "If the wind ever carries my words to you, know that I am still tending the light." He folded the page, placed it inside a tin box, and sealed it beside the others. The collection had grown heavy, more than 20 letters now, each one a conversation with time. At dawn, Elias carried the box outside. The island was bathed in pale gold, waves sliding in lazy arcs over the sand. He knelt near the edge of the shore and placed one letter inside an empty glass bottle. It had once held oil for the lamp, now polished clear by salt water. He pressed the cork in tight, whispered something inaudible, and tossed it gently into the sea. The bottle rolled back once, then caught the pull of the current and drifted away. Elias watched until it vanished beyond the foam line. He did not expect anyone to find it. It was enough to know that a part of his story was now traveling freely, carried by the same tide that had shaped his years. When he turned back toward the tower, sunlight caught the metal railing, throwing a thin streak of light across the stones. For a moment, the lighthouse looked almost alive, its walls glowing, its shadow long and patient. Elias smiled. Still standing, he murmured, touching the cold surface of the door. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of oil and salt. He climbed the narrow stairs, his boots echoing softly. Halfway up, he paused to rest his hand on the wall. Beneath his fingers, he felt the faint vibration of wind pressing against stone, a quiet reminder that even silence has movement. Reaching the top, he opened the window shutters. The ocean stretched endlessly, shimmering under the late morning sun. A few fishing boats moved in the distance like small dark birds. He could almost hear the voices of the fishermen, laughing faintly over the hum of the tide. Elias leaned on the railing, eyes half closed. He thought of how every sound carried history. The roll of waves, the clink of chains, the sigh of wood expanding under heat. The sea was an old storyteller, it remembered everything. And perhaps that was why he stayed. Not because he feared forgetting, but because he trusted the sea never would. Back inside, he opened his journal again. He drew the shape of a wave curling around a bottle and wrote beneath it, "A message is not for the receiver, but for the one brave enough to send it." The light outside dimmed as clouds gathered over the horizon. He knew rain would return by evening, but that thought brought comfort. Rain meant reflection, and reflection meant peace. By twilight, the lamp was glowing again, slicing gentle arcs through the mist. From the shore, anyone who might have passed a sailor, a wanderer, would have seen the beam and felt safe. They would never know the name of the keeper or the letters drifting under their hulls, but they would see the light. And that, Elias thought, was enough. He stood by the window, hands resting on the worn sill. The night air smelled of rain and smoke from his chimney. He whispered to the wind, "Carry her name a little farther tonight." The wind obeyed, brushing past him with a sigh. The sound merged with the turning of the lamp, the pulse of the waves, and the slow breath of a man who had learned to find eternity in small things. By late afternoon, the sky had changed. A slow-moving mass of gray rolled over the horizon, turning the water a deep, restless blue. The air carried a charge that made Elias Navarro pause mid-step as he filled the oil container. He had seen enough seasons on this island to know the signs: the hush before the wind, the stillness before the sea decided to speak. He stepped outside, the breeze tugging lightly at his coat. The lighthouse stood unshaken, tall against the growing clouds. From the hilltop, Elias could see the mainland fading behind a veil of mist. The fishing boats that dotted the coast were already gone, seeking shelter long before the rain would come. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "All right, old friend. Let's see what you've brought this time." The first raindrops were soft, playful even, tapping against the iron railing. He climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room, checking each window latch, each hinge. The lens shone faintly in the dim light, a giant crystal heart waiting to breathe. He trimmed the wick, polished the glass once more, and poured the last of the oil into the reservoir. When the first gust hit, the light was ready. As darkness settled, the storm began its slow chorus. The waves rose, their sound filling the air like the low hum of a cello. The tower swayed ever so slightly, a movement felt more than seen. Elias sat beside the lamp, hands folded, eyes calm. He wasn't afraid. He had learned that storms were simply the sea's way of remembering its strength. And every time, the lighthouse remembered its duty in return. Thunder rolled far off, echoing across the water. The rain came harder now, sliding in sheets across the lantern glass. Each flash of lightning painted the room white for an instant, revealing the keeper's steady figure. The old journal opened beside him. He wrote a single line between the flashes. "Even storms need somewhere to look for light." The ink bled slightly where raindrops found their way through the cracked window frame. He smiled at that, almost amused, and placed his palm over the words until they dried. Hours passed like minutes. The rhythm of the storm became almost musical: the wind, the rain, the steady hum of machinery. Elias watched the lamp's beam sweep across the horizon, fighting the darkness, carving a path through rain and mist. It was beautiful in its persistence. At one point, The wick sputtered as the oil thinned. He leaned forward, adjusting it carefully, his movements slow, patient, deliberate. The flame steadied again, glowing bright amber in the heart of the storm. Down below, the waves crashed louder, but he knew the tower would hold. It had been built by hands that understood both faith and stone. Every block was set with purpose, every seam sealed by the salt of time. By midnight, the worst had passed. The thunder rolled farther and farther away, the sea calming itself like a child exhausted from crying. Elias stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the cold, wet air. Raindrops clung to his eyelashes, and the faintest glimmer of starlight returned between drifting clouds. The ocean glowed silver under the moon's timid return. From somewhere far off, the faint bell of a ship echoed once, as if in gratitude. Elias tilted his head and smiled. "Good," he whispered. "You saw the light." He returned inside and wrote again in his logbook. Tonight, the sea tested the light, but the light did not waver, and neither did I. He left the page open, the ink shining under the lantern glow. The storm had taken something from the island, perhaps a few loose tiles, perhaps a part of the old fence, but it had given back silence. A deep, cleansing silence that wrapped around everything. Elias stood at the window for a long while, watching the clouds drift apart. The stars blinked weakly through the gaps, fragile but faithful. And in that moment, he understood something unspoken, that the true strength of the lighthouse was not in its walls or its flame, but in the hands that kept it steady, even when no one else was watching. He whispered to the fading rain, "You may roar as you wish, old friend, but you'll never drown the light." The words disappeared into the mist, carried out to sea. Inside, the gentle turning of gears continued, marking time the only way a lighthouse could, one slow, endless rotation after another. And as dawn approached, the beam faded with the storm's last breath, leaving behind only calm and the soft sound of waves folding over the sand once more. The morning after the storm felt unreal. The air was clean in a way that only comes after rain, crisp, heavy with salt, smelling of wet wood and earth. Elias woke before sunrise, his body stiff but his mind alert. The sea outside glimmered faintly, calm and forgiving once more. The tower had survived, as it always had, standing proud against the pale orange horizon. He moved slowly, lighting the small stove and boiling water for tea. As he waited, the low hum of wind brushed against the tower's walls. It wasn't harsh anymore, it whispered, almost like a voice. He had heard it many times before, this wind that seemed to carry messages from the past. Some nights, he thought he could hear his father's laughter in it. Other times, he swore he caught the faint sound of church bells from the mainland, carried all the way across the waves. He never told anyone that, of course. People might say old keepers imagined things to feel less alone. But Elias didn't mind the solitude, he had made peace with it. As the tea steeped, he opened his logbook again. The pages were filled with years of his handwriting, each entry a small window into days that might otherwise have been forgotten. Storms, repairs, birds nesting on the ledge, notes about ships seen at dusk, a quiet history that no one but him would ever read. He ran his fingers over the ink and smiled faintly. Some of the older entries had faded, their words dissolving like footprints in sand. He remembered writing them in his youth, back when he first took over the light after his father's passing. Back then, he had believed that keeping the light was a temporary duty, something he'd do until the next chapter of life began. But the next chapter had never come. He had grown old with the lighthouse, and it with him. As the sun rose higher, beams of gold spilled through the glass, warming the cold floor. Dust floated in the air like tiny stars. The wind brushed through the narrow window slits again, soft, humming a tune he almost recognized. Elias closed his eyes. The sound reminded him of the night he first arrived at San Miguel, a young man with calloused hands and a heart full of plans. His father had stood beside him, pointing to the light and saying, "Remember, son, you don't keep the light for yourself. You keep it for those who can't see the shore." He had carried those words with him for decades. Now, they echoed in the wind like a song returning home. He took a sip of tea, smiled, and whispered, "I still keep it, father." Every night, down below, a faint knock echoed through the base of the tower, the wooden door creaking under the morning breeze. For a moment, he thought he heard footsteps outside, slow and heavy on the damp stones. He set down the cup, listening carefully. Nothing. Only the waves, brushing the rocks as if in conversation. He laughed softly at himself. Old age, he murmured. Or maybe the sea just wants company. Still, something in that sound made him curious. He descended the spiral stairs, the echoes of his boots following him. When he opened the door, there was no one there, only a single piece of driftwood washed up near the base of the steps. It was smooth, almost shaped like a hand pointing out to the water. He picked it up, tracing its curves. The sea had a strange way of leaving gifts, fragments of ships, forgotten things turned beautiful again. He placed the driftwood by the doorway, a quiet token of the morning after the storm. Above him, the wind shifted again. This time, he could almost make out words in its rhythm. Not speech, exactly, but something familiar. It carried the faintest echo of a woman's voice, soft and distant, like a lullaby sung across time. He felt his chest tighten, not in fear, but in memory. His mother had sung to him once, when he was still a boy in the village below. Her voice had always mingled with the sound of the sea. Now, it felt like the wind was bringing her back, one breath at a time. Elias closed his eyes again and listened, the melody shaping itself in the quiet. He didn't speak. He just stood there, letting the morning fill with sound, the wind, the waves, the heartbeat of an island that had watched him grow old. And when the song faded, replaced by the soft cry of gulls overhead, he smiled. "You're still here," he whispered. "All of you are." He turned back toward the lighthouse, its glass windows glinting in the light. Inside, the lantern gleamed faintly, though it wasn't lit like it, too, was remembering. He climbed back up to the top, his hands grazing the stone walls, the same ones he had repaired countless times. At the top, he looked out once more over the endless sea. It was quiet now, not silent, but alive with whispers and reflections. He opened his logbook and wrote, "The sea speaks when the world is quiet enough to listen." Then he set the pen down and simply stood there, eyes half closed, breathing with the island itself. The day moved slower than most. The wind softened into a warm breeze, carrying the scent of salt and blooming grass from the far cliffs. Elias sat by the window in the small kitchen, the afternoon light turning his tea amber and his journal pages gold. Outside, the sea was as calm as glass, the kind of day sailors call a sleeping tide. He had spent the morning cleaning the lamp, checking every gear, and polishing the brass fixtures until they glowed. The lighthouse looked almost new again, though its stones were older than any living soul on the island. Every creak and echo inside its walls sounded like a heartbeat, slow, measured, patient. Elias wasn't writing much that day. Instead, he was listening. The sea, the gulls, the whisper of wind against the lantern glass, all of it spoke to him in a language he no longer needed to translate. He turned the page in his logbook and stared at the date. June 18th, the sea is calm. The light burned steady, then, beneath it, he hesitated for a long time before writing. Maybe this will be my last entry. The pen trembled slightly in his hand, not from sadness, but from acceptance. He smiled as he finished the line and leaned back in his chair, letting the soft creak of the wood fill the silence. Outside, the sky began to blush, the first signs of sunset touching the horizon. He rose and made his way up the spiral stairs, one slow step at a time, his hand brushing the railing smooth from decades of use. At the top, he stood before the great lens, his reflection warped in its curves. The light was ready, waiting. He trimmed the wick one last time and struck the match. The flame caught slowly, then bloomed a small sun inside a glass world. The beam stretched outward, reaching over the quiet sea as it had done every night for nearly 40 years. He watched it turn, steady and strong, and as he did, he felt a peace unlike anything he'd known before. There was no sound but the low hum of the lamp and the wind's gentle breathing. The first stars appeared above, tiny and shy. The moon followed soon after, resting low on the horizon, silvering the waves. The ocean looked endless but not lonely. Elias leaned on the railing, his gaze drifting toward the mainland's faint lights in the distance. Somewhere out there, people would see his beam tonight, perhaps without ever knowing who kept it alive. But that didn't matter. The light was never meant to be remembered. It was meant to guide. He thought of his father again, of the first night they lit the lamp together. He remembered his mother's voice in the wind. He remembered the storms, the quiet mornings, the journal pages filled with tiny truths. All of it, bound to this tower of stone and glass. He whispered softly, "You did your part, old friend. You can rest when I do." The wind seemed to answer with a low sigh through the vents, almost tender. He stayed there until the stars fully claimed the sky. The beam continued its steady rotation, slicing through the dark like a heartbeat. Below, waves broke gently against the rocks, their rhythm steady as breathing. When the clock struck midnight, Elias took one last look around the lantern room. He touched the metal frame, the glass, and the brass controls, each a part of a life's routine. Then, he turned off the small kerosene lamp beside his chair. Only the great light remained, sweeping the sea in silence. He walked down the stairs, each step echoing like a memory closing behind him. At the bottom, he paused by the doorway and looked back up the spiraling path of stone. The light above continued to glow, faithful, tireless. He smiled. "The sea will remember," he said softly. And then, for the first time in many years, Elias Navarro allowed himself to rest. Years later, a team of restoration workers arrived at San Miguel Island, guided by coordinates from an old naval map. The lighthouse still stood, weathered but unbroken, its lantern glass coated in dust but intact. Inside, they found Elias's journal resting on the table, open to that final entry. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. The light burned steady. The men stood in silence for a while. Then, one of them, a young keeper assigned to oversee the tower's restoration, whispered, "Let's keep it burning." That night, for the first time in decades, the light of San Miguel shone again across the sleeping sea. Fishermen far away looked up from their boats, confused then smiling. One of them said, "Looks like the old keeper found his way home." And as the waves rolled on, the wind carried faint whispers between them, voices of the past, of the sea, of a man who kept the light alive long after the world stopped watching. And now, as you close your eyes, remember every light you see in the dark has someone's story behind it. If this one helped you drift a little closer to peace, follow for more stories that rest easy on the soul. Good night.